All right, so now we're going to talk about how we can best maximize the amount of cover that we do have afforded by vehicles. There's some discussion back and forth between whether or not it's better to offset your cover or to suck up tight on your cover. And a lot of these arguments, whether they're right or wrong, tend to reinforce certain exercises and certain drills that we do on the flat range, and they don't actually pertain to what happens in the real world. I belong to the camp of sucking up as tight on your cover as close as possible. The arguments against this are stating that if you're too close to your cover, rounds will deflect off and into your body and you'll catch a round when you don't need to. I don't really believe in this because I think it's interjecting a hypothetical into the equation before you actually assess what's taking place. So by assuming that the enemy is going to miss is probably not the best way to set yourself up for success. The reason I believe that you should be as close to your cover as you can be within reason is because it completely drops your silhouette and minimizes how much you're exposing yourself to the enemy. So Danny's behind this vehicle right now. He's maximizing the best part of ballistic protection that he can. So go ahead and get tied up on this cover as if you're actually engaging with a threat. So Danny's silhouette has completely dropped, and you can see that there's a change in the amount of profile that he has exposed. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna back off about 10 yards, and we're gonna look at the argument with regards to whether or not offsetting your cover makes sense. So let's go ahead and take it back. So go ahead and take a knee, Danny. Now there's an argument that you should be offset from your cover because if you're offset, rounds that deflect off of vehicles will not end up in your body and you just won't end up eating those rounds. I think that's a bit of a silly argument because as you can see, the silhouette or the amount of profile that Danny now has exposed is significantly greater than when he was sucked up tighter onto the vehicle using it as ballistic protection. So now we can see that Danny's backed off from his cover and he's mitigating that deflection of a round. So if a round does come in and strike the hood of this vehicle and it deflects upward, because he's separated from his vehicle, he's probably not going to catch that round. But the problem we see with it is he has a lot more of his silhouette exposed. And that's going to be dangerous because he's giving the enemy a lot more target to work with. Something else we want to consider with offsetting our cover or sucking up tight on it is making the enemy react to our decision-making process. The terms working angles or changing the planes of the fight or whatever the current in vogue term is, we want to be making the enemy react to our decisions. Now, if I get too far off of my cover, I minimize the amount of distance that the enemy has to travel to flank my position. If I suck up tight onto my cover, I'm actually able to maximize the distance that he has to travel to get a good shot on me. So if I was going to go ahead and take a shot where I was moving on Danny's flank, I'd have to move all the way up to a position up here to where I could actually effectively get a full profile of Danny and take a shot. Similarly, if I wanted to go all the way in this direction, I'd have to go all the way to a point up here on this berm where I'd have to move to where I can see all of Danny's silhouette. Now, if Danny were completely backed off of his cover, we can see that the angles change and that we have a lot more of his silhouette to work with. So if I wanted to move on Danny's position right now, I wouldn't have to travel all the way to this position here on this berm. I would just have to simply move and I can see him right now. Similarly, if I was going to go off to his flank in this direction, all I'd have to do is go to about this position here at the back of this black vehicle, and I could see all of Danny exposed. Another thing we want to consider in addition to flanking movements or having the enemy maneuver on our position is elevated spots. So if the enemy's shooting at us from an elevated position, if we're up close, tight on our ballistic protection or our cover, this really reduces the silhouette and the amount of profile that the enemy has to work with. If we go ahead and we back off of our cover to an unnecessary distance because again, we're worried about deflection of rounds or different angles that bullets might take when they interact with a vehicle, we can see that we have a lot more of our silhouette exposed. The main reason why this is important is because during the initial phases of an ambush or a complex attack, it is very hard to tell where the gunfire is coming from. It is very ambiguous with regards to where the fire is coming from unless you're in a direct engagement where you can see the guns, you can see the bad guy. This is why it makes more sense for us to suck up as tight as possible on the terrain that we do have so that we can assess the situation and make a decision. What we're gonna do now to tie this all together is we're actually gonna shoot at some targets and we're gonna measure the amount of profile and silhouette that I have exposed by getting close up onto my cover and maximizing ballistic protection and by offsetting too. What we're gonna notice is that when I go ahead and offset my cover, there's gonna be a lot more of my silhouette exposed versus if I get up tight onto my ballistic protection and actually am able to use that terrain to brace my shot too, I'm gonna have a lot less of my profile and my signature showing. So we've talked about offsetting our cover or sucking up tight on it with regards to dry fire, and we've worked different angles to see how maybe backing off our cover might not be the best thing to do if we're in the middle of a complex attack. What we're gonna see is what it looks like if a threat's engaging you from being tight up onto cover or if they're backed off, and we'll see what those angles look like. Now, I'm gonna be shooting at steel and I'm shooting frangible ammo, so just remember if you're shooting steel up close, you always wanna be shooting some kind of frangible ammo. So I come in, I'm gonna go ahead and just give myself that good solid, arm's length distance here from the vehicle. I'm gonna try to minimize my silhouette as much as possible because I wanna maximize the ballistic protection I do have. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna engage this target. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and back off about 10 yards to where I would be if I was offset, and we'll see how that changes my signature and my silhouette with regards to the target. Now I'm still gonna try to keep myself low so I'm not just gaming this, but I want you guys to see how much of my silhouette is exposed now that I'm offset from my target. So we can see that when I'm up close on my ballistic protection, there is the possibility that if a round comes in and it deflects off the hood, I might catch it because I'm up close on my cover. But again, I don't think that makes as much sense because we're injecting hypotheticals into a discussion that should purely be based off of what happens in the real world. We shouldn't plan for the enemy to be terrible marksmen. We should plan for them to be aiming at us and sending accurate fire down range. So I think it's more important to get small behind what we do have and minimize our silhouette to make ourselves a much harder target to shoot at. Another thing to remember is that during the initial ambiguity of a gunfight, during an ambush or a complex attack, it is very hard to tell where incoming fire is coming from. Unless you are directly squared off with a threat, it is very hard to tell where fire is coming from. And if you unnecessarily offset yourself from the ballistic protection or the terrain that you do have, you might be putting yourself at an extreme disadvantage based off of what we saw with increasing our silhouette and our profile, and also minimizing the distance that the enemy has to move on our flanks to pick up our position and make us react to them in the fight.